And I stepped away a few months ago to come back to run the center again, and my partner is running that business. So I wanted to start out today, since I've already done an introduction, with something that I always find to be super important, because it's the basis for everything that starts to happen inside of company building and in your life. So how many of you have heard this proverb before? Raise your hands. All right. How many of you think that there was a lot of scientific data 3,000 years ago when Solomon spoke or wrote these words? How many of you think that there was very much scientific data for it? Raise your hands. You're right. There wasn't any. But around the 1940s, there was this tremendous author by the name of Napoleon Hill who wrote a book called Think and Grow Rich. How many of you guys have heard about that book? All right, now put your hands down. How many of you have actually read that book? All right, it's a fantastic book. It's a great book. So he made this great statement. That whatever the mind of man can conceive and believe, it can achieve. So once again, in the 1940s, how much scientific data do you suppose was around this particular subject right here? Not very much. But there was a lot more than they had before, but not very much still. However, 20 years ago, that changed. So there was a professor at Harvard University, and actually several, that participated in numerous studies. And in this book, published in 2002, I used this in my first publication myself. Even the adult brain is plastic, able to forge new connections among its neurons and thus rewire itself. Sensory input can change the brain, and the brain remodels itself according to behavioral demands. The existence and importance of brain plasticity are no longer in doubt. The brain is dynamic, and the life we lead leaves its mark in the complex circuitry of the brain, footprints of the experiences that we've had, the thoughts we've thought, and the actions we've taken. Now, there's an add-on that I'm going to forward to in just a second, but I want to let that resonate with you. Most of everything that happens to all of you, first had its germ with an idea or a thought. When you hear the words that you are what you think, it's exactly true. And there's a lot of people sitting in this room that sometimes you'll beat yourselves up, you'll have negative thoughts, and these thoughts, I would posit, are just as dangerous as are what you're used to in the church as being immoral thoughts or wicked thoughts. They're just as dangerous because they stop your progression. They stop you from being able to control your potential. I was visiting with a professor on campus who is a rock star in, she's maybe only 42 or 3. I know, she's a pretty young professor. She's widely published in evolutionary theory. And we were talking about what I have often called the shackles of the flesh. Everybody comes to earth with different shackles of the flesh. Everybody. Whether it's blindness or deafness, some come with varying levels of intelligence or various levels of, how we look, our genders, everything about it. I called it shackles of the flesh. She called it the genetic palette. And then she talked about something I hadn't heard before, actually, that was really interesting to me because in addition to studying early Christianity, I've studied quite a bit about evolutionary theory just because I want to understand it in the context of the gospel and other things that are important to me. So as I was visiting with her about this, and she talked about her own son that had a condition that had 6 letters after it. I can't even remember what it was. But she said that her son doesn't have feeling. So that basically he would hold somebody, he's 14, he would hold somebody's head underwater and not have any remorse. I just want you to think about that for a minute. She has another son that has ADD. She has another son that's OCD, goes around the house counting doorknobs. Every one of us have something about us that's unique and different. But what's interesting is that 50% of our makeup is all led by agency, meaning we choose. Remember the scripture? 2 Nephi 2, what? 26, 27. For we are free to choose liberty and eternal life through the Savior, or captivity and death through Satan. We're free to choose. One of the things that you may not know, most of you probably don't know, but from my early Christian studies, there was a doctrine that was known as the two ways, life or death. And then it explained what made up life and what made up death. Another writer called it the ancient law of human liberty. And it was lost for about 1,700 years. And then it was introduced again through the Book of Mormon when Nephi said, or rather Lehi said, for we are free to choose liberty and eternal life. See the connection? The ancient law of human liberty. We are free to choose. So that no matter the genetic palette with which we come to earth, we have a response to that genetic palette, which is why Neil A. Maxwell in the 70s or late 1990s was able to say, when he talked about training our desires, he said that within each one of us there is an inner zone in which we are sovereign, ... unless we abdicate, unless we give in. We're free to choose. So then he said, yes, genes matter and environments matter. These two shape who we are. But within each one of us is an inner zone in which we are sovereign unless we abdicate. Herein, he said, lies the essence of our moral agency. So then we go back to this model right here where sensory input can change the brain. When you think about how hard it is to overcome such things as pornography or other types of addictions, and those things can be, it's not just pornography, it's someone who thinks negatively all the time, or whatever thoughts that you allow to pervade your mind. So he then goes on to say, whoops, where's this going here? Somehow, it's not going the right direction. Yeah, it's not taking it where it needs to be. Put me back to this slide right there. Okay. The brain allocates neural real estate depending on what we use most. The thumb of the video game addict, the index finger of a braille reader, the analytic ability of a chess player, the language skills of a linguist, and then he goes on to say, but the brain rewires itself on something much more ephemeral than what we do. It rewires itself based on what we think. This is very important to you guys. It will guide much of what happens to you in mortality and your success and the way that you view the world and all the things that are going on in the secular world. There is a way to balance out all the things that are going on in the secular world with all the things that are going on in the church. This was written again by Jeffrey Schwartz, published in 2002. I've seen numerous publications about this since, and now we have all of the evidence that we didn't have 3,000 years ago when Solomon said, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. So I give this to you so that you have the opportunity to think those positive thoughts and have that positive energy, and you take control of your lives and you don't become a slave to any part of you, not even your genetic palette. So I want to tell you why it's important that you're taking this class. A lot of you guys really care about what goes on in the world, and you care what happens to each other. This generation cares more about that than any other generation, collectively. It's one of the really, truly bright spots of this generation. So then sometimes you will have a thought that, well, maybe socialism isn't such a bad idea. But the problem with socialism is it breaks up against, correct principles, which are that you will never give anybody self-esteem by doing something for them that they can do for themselves. You'll never do it. You'll rob them of something that's really, really important. Their agency and the fact that, as the Savior talked about the law of the harvest, he talked about saying that we reap what we sow. And remember in the beginning when the Lord told Adam that by the sweat of his brow, that's how he would take care of himself. He introduced into the world the law of opposition in all things, meaning that whatever we do, there's a response. When you pick up one end of the stick, you get the other end of the stick with it. Everything that goes with it, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Even if you don't want it, you still get it because you picked up this end of the stick. So when we talk about socialism, there isn't enough money from all the wealthy people in the world to solve the problem of poverty. And if you could solve the problem of poverty by just giving it to people, then what you would do is you would have a people bankrupt of character and values and of ability and capacity because they have never had to fight and struggle to be able to obtain the things that they need and want in mortality. Now, having said that, it doesn't mean then that we let all the other people around us struggle. That's why those who have, it's incumbent upon them that they learn to give. So let me show you this model here. I talked to Jeff Harbaugh, who we spent quite a bit of time together 3 or 4 months ago. He's the CEO of the Kauffman Fellows Foundation. None of you will know Ewing Kauffman, but I knew him personally. Ewing Kauffman was the owner of the Kansas City Royals. He was the founder of Marion Laboratories, named after his wife. They developed a multi-billion-dollar company, and when he passed, he left a lot of money to start the Kauffman Foundation. The Kauffman Foundation is the primary organization in the world that does entrepreneurial research. And there are 2 different divisions of it. One is the Kauffman Foundation and one is the Kauffman Fellows Foundation. Jeff Harbaugh is a convert to the church, played on the tennis team here at Brigham Young University. He's a young entrepreneur, 37 years old, had been very successful, and they tapped him to be the CEO of the Kauffman Fellows Foundation. So he showed me this graph on the research that they had done, and it's very compelling. All of you know about GDP, which is the global domestic product, right? So if you'll look here, this doesn't have one of those, I don't think. Does it have a, yes. You'll see right up here Switzerland and the United States. The United States is actually up there, but on a per capita basis, when you look at entrepreneurship, the impact, this is GEI, meaning the Global Entrepreneurial Index, versus the GDP. Notice down here all of the third world countries that do not have a lot of entrepreneurial endeavors going on. Now, interestingly, the correlation between the GDP and the GEI parallel exactly, meaning that if we were to have a 10% rise in the Global Entrepreneurial Index, we would increase the global GDP by $23 trillion, which would essentially solve poverty throughout the earth. The U.S. GDP is 18 to 19 trillion dollars. If we were to increase the global output, then we would have 23 trillion dollars new into the GDP. This is why it matters to you. You have a question?
What is the GEI? What are those numbers mean on the bottom? Because I know on the left, the numbers there are like thousands of dollars per person, right? $20,000, $30,000.
Yeah, this is a measure or metric. We didn't get into the actual. He just showed me the correlation. So I'm 4 months away from the conversation, so I can't really answer specifically. But this is a graph that he gave me that showed how, as the GEI increases, that's what happens to the GDP. So it's a big deal. It's a very big deal. And also, it doesn't matter what major you are. The reason that entrepreneurship matters to you is that if you decide to go inside of a corporation, then you can be an entrepreneur, which means that you're an innovator, that you know how to innovate. So about 4 years ago, 3 years ago, a little over 3 years ago, I was invited to speak at the conference board meeting in New York City. It's a large group of COOs, chief operating officers, people that lead the large Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies. Those are the kind of people that attend. So you have the chief talent officers, and then you have the COOs that attend this meeting. And I spoke to them on innovation. Now, it's not because I'm really maybe the greatest speaker in the world, but it was the most popular presentation because they struggle with it the most. Because of disruption, they have little companies that come in and eat away at them, and they don't have a good response to the new technologies, to the disruption that's taking place, because it's so hard to cannibalize their existing product by introducing a new product that they haven't figured out how to innovate as they go. Anyway, if you decide to be into, if you decide to go into the corporate environment, the stuff that is taught in entrepreneurship is exceedingly important. If you decide to start your own business, knowing how to start it is utterly important. If you decide that you're going to have a music studio, or you're going to teach dance, or whatever, you're still going to be able to innovate so that you're not doing it just the way that somebody else is doing it. You've learned how to introduce something that's incredibly more powerful and important, and you can actually make a lot of money doing it so that your time becomes more valuable. So at any rate, this is important. So there was a paradigm shift in entrepreneurship that took place really about 10 years ago. I read a book called The 4 Steps to the Epiphany. It was written by Stephen Blank. It's a pretty tough book to read, actually. It's pretty dense. And a lot of people didn't read it because it was dense. But I read it, and I was very interested in it because it conveyed all of the problems that I had had in starting businesses over a 35-year or 30-year career of doing businesses. 30 years, not 35. So I'm not that old. So, all right, so this guy right here, Alfred Sloan, how many of you know who he is? Raise your hand. Then yell it out, except you. So he is known as the father of the modern corporation, General Motors, and he is who is known for the Sloan School of Management at MIT. So now, do you know this guy, Billy Durant? Anybody know Billy Durant? So Billy Durant is actually the founder of General Motors. So he was an entrepreneur, the first one to do horse and buggy, the carriage. And he did different makes and models, features, and it just wasn't stereotypical. Made a lot of money. The car comes along with Henry Ford, and he starts a car company. And it gets to be pretty big. But he's not a finished operator. And so he gets booted out of his own company by the board. So he goes and starts Chevrolet. And it gets bigger than General Motors. And he buys it. So he's back on top again. But then, because he doesn't have those efficiencies that a seasoned operator would have, he gets kicked out again. And in comes Alfred Sloan. And everybody remembers Alfred Sloan because he's the one that really scaled General Motors. But Billy Durant was the guy that actually started the company. There is a difference between the entrepreneur and the large corporation. And 80 years ago, and for all these years, universities were teaching that entrepreneurship was big business's little brother. And so they would teach it as it were that way. And no wonder that we had far more than 90% failure rates of businesses. But about 10 years ago, as I said, I read that book, The 4 Steps to the Epiphany, and when I came to the center in 2010, we were the first university in the country, in the world, to adopt the lean startup. And we actually started the International Business Model Competition, and it started with 6 universities right here at Brigham Young. Last year we were in Silicon Valley, and we had almost 600 universities from 28 countries and about almost 6,000 teams that participated, and it's owned by Brigham Young University. And we have changed the way that Chile and Peru and Jamaica and other countries are actually performing entrepreneurship throughout the whole country. Now, how many of you guys know this fellow right here? Raise your hands. Yep, Philo Farnsworth. What was he known for? All right, did he make it famous? No. Yep, exactly. RCA made it famous. Again, showing how important it is to know how to start a company so that you retain power over the cap table, so that you retain the value that you created, and Philo never did benefit from it. But what I'm telling you is here at Brigham Young University, we have tons of resources to help you guys to realize your dreams, whatever the level of those dreams are. Whether or not it's a family business, whether or not it's a big scalable venture, whether or not it's entrepreneurship inside of a large corporation, we have the opportunity to really be able to help. What we like to be able to do is to show you that entrepreneurship or building a company isn't all that different from playing basketball. How does that work? So, what are the skills that are necessary to become a great basketball player? Okay, you got to be a good shooter. You got to have good free throws. You got to be able to pass. You got to be able to dribble. You got to be able to rebound. You got to be able to play defense, and so on, right? So you can take each one of those in isolation and you can actually get good at them. Like when my oldest son was 5 years old, I had a college basketball player teach him how to dribble, and he put him through all these dribbling drills so that he could show him how he could practice the correct principles over and over and over again. Now, why is that important? See, I've been a golfer since I was 11 years old, and my handicap is still, vacillates depending on how much I play, from like 12 to 16 or 17. So I'm really not that good, even though I've been playing for, 45 years, whatever. I've been playing for a long time, but I'm not that good. Why? Because I don't take the time to practice, and when I do practice, I'm pretty much practicing all the things that I already know. So in order to improve, I would have to have an instructor come and show me the right principles, and then I have to practice that over and over, and it would take a big, effort on my part that I don't have that much time. So this is important. Now, how do I translate to business? So I can become gifted at product development and innovation. There's a great book called The Innovator's DNA. It's just so many things that you can do to help yourselves to be successful. And so what I'd like to do is give you one of my favorite sayings. Successful people are successful because they're willing to do the things that unsuccessful people are not willing to do. Now that sounds really super easy. I'll give you another one. One of my friends told this to me probably 30 years ago. He said, Scott, you can work for 5 to 7 years like nobody else will, and you can then live the rest of your life like nobody else can. Oh, it goes back to that scripture, for you're free to choose. Mediocrity or significance. You're free to choose. It's up to you. It's all in your court. And so you can learn product development and innovation. You can learn marketing and branding. You can learn sales and sales leadership. You can learn operations, which includes onboarding, client success, supply chain management, office space and maintenance. You can learn administration, how to manage a reception desk, human resources, communication, and so on, and finance and legal. And you can take each one of these and you can become familiar with all of them. Familiar enough that you know how to lead all of them. Like, I'm not a lawyer, but I tell you that I have a blue-collar law degree, and it's come from making lots of mistakes and then You know, when you make mistakes, you get experience. And when you get experience, you get wisdom. And wisdom seems to always come from bad experience, teaching you not to do it again. Just like when you touch a hot stove, you learn not to do it again. So here at Brigham Young, we have this incredible startup model that I introduced 8 years ago in a cruder form, and it's more refined today. So what's important about this model is it's simple. As smart as you guys are, even you guys can't screw it up. I was hoping you guys would get that. Okay. So when I went to MIT, they had a 26-step method, and I thought to myself, are you kidding me? No one's ever going to do that. It's ridiculous. But you can understand what it means to go from an idea. And yeah, there's a bunch of things that are in the idea phase, and there's a bunch of things in the model stage, and in the build phase, and in the scale stage. And you can notice what we're doing up here in the corners, that, you know, we want to develop an idea that has blue ocean versus red ocean. Because if you're a shark and you're out in the middle of the ocean, you don't want to share the food supply with all the other sharks. You're hoping to have all the food for yourself. And it's the same thing in business. You know, you'd rather have a competitive advantage that nobody else has so that it's not so competitive. And whether it is a company like Omaudi that has a lot of competitive advantages, or where it's Best Vinyl, my vinyl fence company, where we had 170 competitors in Utah. It's putting in fence. How hard is that? But we became the largest in 5 years in the entire country by a lot. Because in each of those areas that I pointed out after you saw the basketball hoop, we made sure that we were rock stars in every one of those. And that alone was our competitive advantage. So that when somebody saw a sales presentation from Best Vinyl, and then they saw a presentation from a competitor, it was like, you know, night and day. And so when the customer had to decide, well, who am I going to go with? They say, well, I like these guys because I know that these guys know what they're doing. And this is a long-term investment. So then you go down to the model. That's why you want blue ocean. Building a model is creating it spiritually before you create it physically first. You ever heard that before? Oh. You probably wouldn't build a house without a set of blueprints, would you? If you did, it would be a mess. It wouldn't be very good. The same is true with your business. You're going to architect it. We'll show you how. And then in this build phase, you actually do have to build something. And if you don't build it right here, then you will not be prepared to scale. And it'll be a big problem for you. It'll cost you millions of dollars. I promise you. On my honor, and I'll bet you my whole net worth, that if you don't know how to do this, then you will not do this. So, beautifully, the school year is set up perfectly for this. So, during September and October, we focus on teaching you guys how to come up with great ideas, and we incent you to come up with great ideas by, at the end of it, having the big idea pitch. And let me tell you about some of the winners, like Owlet Baby Monitors, who started out with a napkin, right, like this. And then 5 years later, he has a $40 million company. He did $40 million in revenue last year, a BYU company that started here, a student just like you guys. And from the big idea competition, he won the business model competition. And from there, he won the new venture competition. And then he went throughout the summer and got invited to Techstars. And after he went to Techstars, he got $2 million of seed angel funding. And then they got another round of funding, and now they're cash flow positive. They don't need any more venture, and they're doing fantastic. It all started because they participated here. On February 2nd, we're going to have the finals of the business model competition. And it means what we're rewarding here is we're teaching students how to start a business in the right way. So we're rewarding the process of starting a business more than anything during this particular competition. And there's a lot of money at stake. And then from February and March, it'll all be about customer acquisition. And then in customer acquisition, we'll have this competition called the Miller New Venture Challenge, and 10 BYU businesses will get $15,000. And then they'll use that money during the summer to come to what we call the Founders Launchpad. It's a endeavor that we started 7 years ago, and so every summer we model it after Techstars or Y Combinator, and we help them to build their business during the summer with a whole lot of mentoring and effort. So this is a model that shows you kind of how this works. So whoops, it's not going to do it again. There we go. Okay, we start out any business by saying what's available today. Why is that important? Well, because if you go and sit down in front of any venture group and they say, who are your competitors? Oh, we don't have any competitors. And they'll go on the web and they'll say, oh, in 5 minutes they'll show you 20. And you're done. You're done. So what happens then is you identify these holes that you've identified here, things they're not doing, things that if you did, you would say, wow, I'm going to have a ton of blue ocean here. I'm going to have a really awesome blue ocean strategy business model. So one of those was Eric, what's his last name? Rios, with Podium. So he starts here 4 years ago, just like you guys, and now has a company worth a couple $100 million. He's not any different than you guys. As a matter of fact, I can tell you that professors who knew him back in class are shocked. Remember what we talked about, as a man or woman thinketh in their heart, so are they? This is what I'm talking about. You can do this. You guys are more than you have any idea. All of you. And especially, I want to direct my message to all of you young women. You guys are powerhouses. And you guys can truly rock it. Don't ever sell yourself short. You guys can crush it. And many of you will. Okay, so then did it again. From these holes, we develop these value statements so that we can say, you know, what they're currently doing today is this, but what we're proposing is this. And the advantage of doing this over this is this, and the economic benefit to you is this. It's called the FAB model, feature, advantage, benefit. You can do that to each one of those holes that you identify, and you can really start to learn how to sell whatever it is your idea is all about. And then you have to ask yourself, what is the job to be done? And then you start testing and validating your assumptions, whether they're correct or dead wrong or partly right or partly wrong, or you learn something new. All of this is learning that then goes into your virtual prototype. And when you feel like you've got it absolutely nailed, then you build an MVP and you go sell 2 or 3 or 4 customers. And then you come back and incorporate all the changes that they asked you to make or that you learned about, and you build a minimum sellable product. You go get 10, 15, 20 more customers, and then finally you develop a map, and then you're ready to start building preparatory to scaling. So you'll learn about the business model canvas, or Ash Moria, who we've partnered with here at BYU, wrote the book Running Lean and Scaling Lean. This is really the easiest to follow. I love this model. I've been teaching these concepts for 8 years, and he put them onto a canvas. Now, leadership is different at each stage of starting a business. So it starts out as a project management when you're in business model development, and ultimately when you're in the scale stage, it will be right over here. But the leader that you need to be must evolve from here to here to here to here. So part of what you're going to want to do, and I'll talk about this in my final notes, which I'm going to get to pretty much right now, because you get the idea of this, and if you have any questions about this, we have Q&A afterwards. Now, we've told you that Q&A is where a lot of the real meat from the lecture series is going to take place. And so I hope that all of you will plan to come like they did last semester, because everybody left that class saying, this is the best we've ever had. And you'll find that to be true. And remember, I know you got other stuff to do and places to be, but successful people are successful because they're willing to do the things that unsuccessful people, like everyone has an excuse. Just come, and it will be a great benefit to you. Now, I want to finish with, as an entrepreneur who's personally done 7 different companies, I want to tell you what I've learned over the years that matters to me about company building. And I hope that some of this will be valuable to each one of you. The first thing, and I get people all the time that come up to my office and say, man, I really don't know what I want to do with my life. And this is one of the first things that I tell them, that you identify your gifts, and you all have them. And you should go through the exercise of writing them down and forcing yourself to actually do this. And if you don't do this, then you're missing something that's really super important about mortality. Every one of you are given gifts, and wouldn't it be a shame if you were given a gift that you never took the time to go and develop? Wouldn't that be a shame? So let's not have that happen. You identify your talents, you identify your passions, and you develop your interests, and that's going to be a big guide to help you understand where to go. Your patriarchal blessing will say a lot about that. And then you can think about all of the opportunities that come up, because you have a loving God that cares about you, and He cares about your success. And don't think that there aren't going to be opportunities put in front of you that if you're prepared to take, that He meant for you. But you have to be observant. Remember Amaron speaking about mighty Mormon when he said at a young age that Mormon was quick to observe. If you're not ready to start a business yet, and most of you aren't, then you've got to go out and get some really great experience. But then you have to learn how to fight like a lion, really a lion, to be able to get that perfect internship, to get what you need to get where you want to go. And remember that if you show the grit that you're capable of showing, you'll get whatever it is that you want. So you have to read from the best startup and leadership books, and you can go right back to here and realize that, oh, this is a correct principle. So I had one of my friends that sent me a text at the end of last year, and he listed 37 books, deep books, not small ones, that he had read during the course of the year. He's a very successful physical therapist. He has about 6 shops that he owns. And we play tennis and do a bunch of stuff. Anyway, a great guy. But he read 37 books. So I have a library that is over 2,000 volumes. And I've read a ton of those books. I've read a ton of them. And it's how I wrote my books on early Christianity, called, as you remember, Where Have All the Prophets Gone? And Do the Mormons Have a Leg to Stand On? 2 dense books. As a matter of fact, my wife, when she was reading the manuscript of the first, she said, well, Scott, I can tell that this is a book that I'm not going to be reading. And you know what? She hasn't disappointed me. But it has a really, actually, pretty good cult following. The people that have read it, it's a dense book. And it's just not her interest area. So it doesn't hurt my feelings. But I can tell you that reading is important. And digesting the information and making it usable. The difference between adult learning and or andragogical learning, and pedagogical learning. Most of the learning that you do here at Brigham Young is pedagogical, but in the entrepreneurship program, it's andragogical. It's adult learning. It's learning that's based on experience, experiential learning, and it sinks deep. And so when you read something with an intent, not for retention or to get a grade, but because you have a passion for it, then you will indeed really be able to start learning stuff that will make you wise. Choose your partners carefully. If you choose to have partners, remember, it's like choosing a spouse. You're going to spend a lot of time with them. You're going to have to put a lot of trust into them. Don't do it lightly. Be careful. Choose them carefully. Now, before you ever establish a cap table, ownership or equity percentages, or articles of incorporation, I beg you, please, come to the center, consult with us. Don't do it. You're going to screw it up, and you're going to cost yourself a lot of money. Will you remember that? Remember that I said it. Because if you ever do it, you'll go back and you'll waste millions of dollars, as I have over the years, because I didn't know this when I got started. So you develop a money plan before you get started. Guys, you can't go into starting a company and not count the cost. It costs money. It costs time. You have to know how you're going to fund those early months or maybe first year or two. You got to have a plan. Make sure you have a plan. Money makes people do really funny things, even good people like all of you. I can tell you there is nothing important to me, more important to me than honor and integrity. And I have lost millions over the years in the name of honor and integrity. I don't care about money. I care about people. I care about my reputation, and I care about my character. And character is different than reputation. A reputation is who others think you are. A character is who you really are. I care about both of them, but I care more about my own character. You should too. So make sure that you don't let money trump whatever goes on in your business relationships. Take care of your own money, but take better care of somebody else's. When you take the stewardship of getting investor money from other people, you need to own it. You have a responsibility to pay them back and to get them a return. They were counting on you. Now, that doesn't mean that if you did your very, very, very best and it doesn't work out, well, that happens. There are risks out there, and you shouldn't really worry about that. But it shouldn't be a situation where you start taking money out of the company or misusing that money. You need to be a fantastic steward over any of the resources that other people trust you with. Find out what you don't know and then know it. Now, this sounds like a little simple phrase and you could forget it. Don't forget it. In all of your ventures, I will tell you that you don't even know some of the questions you should be asking. And if you don't know the questions, then how in the world will you know the answers? So, learn what it is that you don't know and then work feverishly, diligently, and then know it. Pay attention to the bottlenecks whenever you have a business that's up and going. What's not working? Go dissect it, figure it out, and make it work. Stop the bottleneck. Owner development is a huge key to the company's success. So as I told my last class, there's such a thing, that they've talked about for years in business called the Peter Principle, where people rise to the level of their incompetence. And when that happens, you're done. And if you get there and you still own the company, your company's done. It's not going anywhere. So the only way around that is for you to invest in yourself, which is why Stephen Covey said as his 7th habit that you have to continually reinvent yourself. You have to sharpen the saw. So that's where the 2,000 books come in. So I hope that you guys will think about what you need to do on a weekly basis that's measurable to sharpen the saw. Be patient in taking your rewards, and it'll yield big dividends later. So you don't have to make 100,000. You can make nothing for 2 years. Be patient, and when you sell your business, you'll be rich. Don't do anything with your harvest money until you've learned solid investment principles. Wait a while. When I sold my first company, I invested too quickly. I lost $1 million pretty quickly investing with the wrong people. I can tell you that's a lesson that I've learned, and it was expensive. And I hope if you learn nothing else in the lecture series, that you can be a great spouse, a great parent, you can serve others, and you can still have a hobby. You don't have to be married to your business. I am a monogamist. I am married to one person, my wife. I never was married to my business. I loved her first and foremost, and my 5 children. So I want to promise you that it's like the fishes and the loaves, that if you do everything in your power to put the kingdom first and to be a good person and to learn and follow all the correct principles, that you're going to be successful, and you will find it's like the fishes and the loaves. It doesn't make any sense, but somehow you'll figure out how to do it all, even if you can't do it all at once. God bless you, my young friends. We'll see you up in 710 for the Q&A. Thank you.